Hello and welcome to TandL Talks, the podcast for, about, and featuring fabulous educators. Today I'd like to welcome to the TandL Clubhouse someone who does deeply important work across our district, often behind the scenes, and always with students and families at the center. I'm joined today by Kayla Guyette, our Native American Education Liaison. Kayla is Jicarilla Apache from northern New Mexico, and she brings more than 15 years of Native education experiences across tribes, school districts, and state-level work to her current role serving students and families here in the Puyallup School District. In this episode, we talk about what Native education really looks like in our schools today, why it matters for every educator, and what it means to move from intention to action when it comes to belonging, identity, and truth-telling in our curriculum. We also dig into John McCoy lulilaš since Time Immemorial tribal sovereignty curriculum and the small, powerful choices that signal to students and families, you belong here. So settle in, Tandlers. This conversation is honest, hopeful, and full of practical wisdom for anyone who wants to do this work well. Let's get started. Today I'd like to welcome to the TandL Clubhouse Kayla, who is our Native American Education Liaison. Kayla, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Good day. My name is Kayla Guyette. I am Jicarilla Apache, which is a tribe way down in northern New Mexico. And I have been Puyallup School District's Native Education Liaison. This is my second year now, so just started the work here in Puyallup School District. I have about 15 years of Native education across various agencies. I have worked for tribes, for districts at the state level, and now currently am back at Puyallup School District at a district level.
Great. I always like to start by asking guests to think about a teacher who has had a big influence on you sometime in your life.
I think one of the teachers that has had the biggest impact in my life, and it's kind of maybe a cheat for me, but it was a teacher I had as an adult, was a teacher from the Puyallup Tribal Language Program. He's actually the consultant. His name is Zalmai Aswali Zahir, and he is the person that we go to for all of our language questions. But more than that, more like past the technical idea of learning the language, he shares a lot of the beliefs and the ideologies in how we teach students. And he embodies those. And so when he teaches at all, he really teaches in that traditional SEOB way, and it really makes you feel seen and part of the community. So he's had a huge impact on my life personally, but also just how I am as a teacher.
I love that. You know, as I ask that question to people, what comes up almost always is feeling that sense of belonging to a community and that relationship. And I think that's what I heard in your answer too. It's just a reminder of the power that teachers have over us forever and ever and ever.
Yeah.
It's good stuff. So what does Native American education look like in our schools, and what might surprise people about the scope of your work?
Yeah. So Native education looks different all across the United States. Here in Puyallup School District, it even looks different than it did 3 years ago. It is an ever-evolving program and service that we offer to students. So currently, it looks a little more high-level reaching for students. Historically, it has looked like what's the idea? Historically, it has looked more individualized, where students were pulled out of classes maybe once a month. They would meet the Native Education Liaison for about 30 minutes, and then they'd go back to class. They might do a craft or something during that time. As we have kind of learned more, we've kind of seen that that isn't super effective for students. So we've tried more of a high-level approach where we're ensuring that there are policies across the district that help our students. There's professional development specifically for educators or for administrators that end up helping our students in the long run. And also there's been a really big push to ensure that we have curriculum that's good for all students. But once again, this ends up helping our Native students in how they are seen in their curriculum, in their schools, in their history. So that's, I would say that's probably half of what Native education looks like in our district. I think the other half of that is student and family facing. We do have monthly gatherings for our families. We have workshops and opportunities that are just available for our Native students and families, and they're invited to those throughout the year.
Great. So why is it important for all of our teachers, regardless of grade level or content area, to understand Indigenous history and sovereignty and perspectives?
Yeah, I think I believe it's important for every person in the United States to learn and know Indigenous history of the areas that they're from. I think it's even more important when we're in an educational setting. Historically, when we think about the education system, specifically the US education system, it was built with a very specific purpose. And unfortunately, the early workings of that purpose were to erase a lot of the Native identity, the culture, the history, the language from our Native American youth. And so it's so important when we think about it's 2025 now, and we still have a US education system that often erases or mistells the history of Native America. It's so important that we are the ones who put a little bit of personal effort, but also educational and professional effort into understanding the true history that many of our families have gone through throughout their generations and their time, but also that our students are still affected by today.
Right. How does culturally responsive teaching specifically support our Native students' sense of belonging, of identity, of academic success?
I think culturally responsive teaching, of course, is great for all students, obviously. But once again, as a reminder, our Native American students are coming at quite a deficit as they're trying to come out of a system that was built to take away that sense of belonging. We would have students who came to schools, they were treated a certain way and asked to do certain things. And when they went back to their communities, they no longer belonged in those communities. And so, once again, they're facing quite a different set of barriers than many other students. So it's so important when we think about culturally responsive teaching is that we're very mindful that we have generations of work that we are trying to repair, and we only have a student for maybe 6 hours a day. Hopefully we have them for the majority of their time in K-12 education, but the impact that we can garner, it really does happen in that culturally responsive sense of everything that we do when we interact with the student, the parent, even some of the phrases that we use in the classroom, sometimes being really mindful about, how we address the grownups. And I know this has become more of a thing in our classrooms, but how we address when we talk to students about getting things signed and we say parents, instead of saying parents, right? Many of our Native students live with grandma, grandpa, or auntie, uncle, or an older sibling. And so just being really mindful about some of those small things that may be embedded in our pedagogy that we might try a little bit harder to flex to ensure that all of our students feel seen in our classrooms.
Right. That point too about generational, when you think as you talk about those kids who came to school and the intent of school was to erase their culture, those are the parents and grandparents of today's students. And I think that is a big part of the work that I think you do and all of us are doing is trying to make a school a place for everybody. All families belong here. All cultures belong here. All kids belong here. That's a heavy lift when there's generational trauma, right?
Yes. Yeah. One of the things that I like to advocate for, and this is more specifically when I'm working with administrators in our buildings, but still really important for our educators, is that the US education system, I think many of us are raised in it. If you are not raised in it or if you had a certain experience through it, it can be a really intimidating, really scary, really traumatic place to walk into physically, like
Right.
coming into the building, coming into the office. And so just knowing that is the truth of quite a few of our parents, I always like to remind our administrators, we have to actively work to make sure that our parents feel comfortable even engaging in the littlest bit because we do have to repair a lot of the harm. And once again, that's not even the student I'm talking about full-grown adults who don't feel comfortable coming into the four walls of our buildings. So yeah, it is, unfortunately, it's a lot of work and it's a lot of relationship building that needs to happen, but it's so important because as soon as our students feel or our parents feel empowered to come into buildings to have the conversations, they show us more of them and they help us learn from their experience and help their students too.
Right. So for teachers who say, I really want to do this well, I want to support my Native kids, I want to support all of my kids, but I'm nervous and I'm afraid I'm going to say something wrong or do something wrong. What would you want those people to?
Yeah. This is the most common phrase or idea that I hear from teachers who want to start in the good work, but they're a little bit nervous to do it, which is totally normal. I think as teachers, we forget what it's like to be on the learning end of it, to feel, right, that, oh, I'm scared or I don't know all the answers right now, and our kids go through that every day. So I love kind of putting myself in that position. My promising practice that I tell all educators if they want to start the work is that it is going to feel uncomfortable. It should feel uncomfortable. You are learning things that you probably didn't learn growing up. You're learning a lot of hard histories, but it won't get any easier unless you start. So whenever I work with teachers, I will always say, I will be there if you would like help in starting the conversation, but you have to work to where you are leading those conversations without me. So it's really just about putting in the personal and professional time and effort into learning some of the history, into learning the curriculum, into learning about the relationships and the partnerships when it comes to tribes, to Native American students, to the programs, and just to the communities that we're around. So unfortunately, there's not a super easy answer. The answer is that we have to start with the learning, and it can be uncomfortable, but it has to be done.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about the whole big name is John McCoy lulilaš. Since time immemorial, we call it JML-STI. And while that's not an official part of your job, you have just been such a great partner for teaching and learning as we've made those resources better for our elementary teachers. And you did such a great job of very kindly telling us when things should probably be eliminated. And we want to make sure that we're getting it right. And you have been such an advocate there. You also were significant at the state level with JML-STI. So I know it's in your heart. So what makes JML-STI different from what so many of us learned in school?
Yeah, we love JML-STI.
Yeah.
It is a passion project of mine. And so I do it all the time because I love it. But also I just want to acknowledge, yes, it is for all students and it should be taught to all students. But once again, it's one of those things where it really helps my students.
Right.
It's something where the whole class is hearing it, but my students are really hearing it and seeing it. And also their classmates are interacting with them as they grow a little bit differently. So that's one of the reasons that I love JML-STI so much. And the original question was,
I lost my notes. What makes it different from
yeah.
what many of us learned in school?
Yeah. So the JML-STI curriculum is the Washington State Tribal Sovereignty Curriculum. There's a couple things that make it different than what we learned. The first is that this curriculum was created and vetted by all 29 federally recognized tribes here in Washington State, which is something that has never happened before. So cool. At least in Washington State, this has never happened. Tribes all coming together and agreeing that this is a history, these are understandings that need to be taught in our schools so that once again, our kids can have understanding, our kids can be in the curriculum, but also because other students, all other folks in Washington State should be hearing this history. So the first, right, is that it was tribally created and vetted. But the second is that it will sound a lot different than the history that we heard growing up. One of the things I always say is that if you grew up in the U.S. education system, I'm sure you heard about Native peoples at least once. It was probably somewhere out in the plains. There was probably some buffalo, there were probably some teepees, and then they disappeared at a certain point in time, and you never heard about them again. JML-STI tries to, and I think it does a really good job of rebuking that idea. It is a place-based curriculum, which means it's located here in Washington State. It's up to each district to try and work with their partner tribe to make it even more specific. So for us here in Puyallup School District, as you know, the Puyallup tribe are our tribal partners. So a lot of the lessons that students will see talks about tribal peoples in general, but specifically touches on Puyallup tribal information, which is so great because once again, we're in a district, we're in a city that has borrowed the name from the people of the Puyallup tribe. So it's so important that our kids can learn that history. It also ensures that students hear a contemporary lens through the curriculum. So once again, when we think to our schooling, it was like way back in the day, and then they all kind of disappeared. No one knows what happened to them, and now here we are. JML-STI ensures that whenever we talk about something happening in the past, that there's always reaffirming that tribal peoples are still here. You'll see if you've ever taught any of the lessons, there's always some clip. Maybe it's an excerpt, maybe it's a picture, maybe it's a video of people within the last decade where they're speaking, where you can see them, where you can hear from them. And then it makes it less of a this was in the past, this is history, this is no longer relevant to us, and more of I've seen that person walking down the street. That person is wearing the same sweatshirt that I have. They look just like me, or they look just like my friend's mom. It makes it really, it makes the connection for the kids and I think educators at this point. I think some educators are shocked to know that Puyallup peoples and tribal peoples are still thriving today. They're still giving to community and they're partnering to ensure that the work continues.
Great. Can you tell me just briefly who was John McCoy lulilaš and why is he important to this work?
Okay. So John McCoy was a Tulalip tribal member. He has passed within the last couple of years. He served on both the Senate and House of Representatives in Washington state, but he fought really hard to ensure that the since Time Immemorial curriculum, the tribal sovereignty curriculum, was a mandated curriculum for all schools in Washington state. The fight lasted 15 years, and he did a lot of that groundwork. He worked with tribes, he pushed the state, he pushed other organizations to make sure that we could even have a curriculum on the books, even though it was just recommended. He continued to push to ensure that it was mandated, to ensure that every school was compelled to do this work. So he fought really hard, and he did all of this after he had already retired out of the U.S. service. So he put in so much effort and love into not only his tribal community, but also for the entire state has benefited from the work that he has done. So we are very grateful. After he passed, the year after he passed, his family put forward legislation to rename the Since Time Immemorial curriculum to add his English name, John McCoy, and to add lulilaš, his Indian name, which is the first time we see a tribal language in Washington state in any of our bills. So it's really, really cool.
That's significant for sure. Thank you. What are some misconceptions that educators have about Native history or Native students that JML-STI helps disrupt?
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm going to go students first.
Okay.
I think one of the things that JML-STI does well when it comes to ideas we might have about Native students and Native peoples in general. Once again, we all came up with this understanding of Natives are way back in the day, far away over there. And so I think it really disrupts that idea. It disrupts it as in we have Native peoples here today that are thriving. One of the arguments we make when I used to go around and do this training for the state is I would have educators or principals say, we don't have any Native students in my building. And the response is, I promise you do. I promise you do. If I pulled your data right now, I could find them. You might not be able to find them, but I know they're there. So I think it also disrupts that idea of there's so few of us and they're not really around, so it doesn't really matter. I think also one of the most important things I know personally I've seen happen to my kids and adults in the district is that when we make sure that we give the contemporary lens at the end of lessons or during lessons, where we show pictures of literal tribal members around from this area, they often don't look how you might think a stereotypical Native person looks. I have little Native babies with blonde hair and blue eyes or bright red hair. My son is mixed, and so he presents just as African American. And so it's really important. I think it's so important because I hear kids, I hear adults, I even hear some elders say, like, I don't look Native. And that's the most harmful thing we as Native peoples can continue to perpetuate is that there is a look of Native peoples now. Many of us have married into many other different races, and we all look different at this point. And so it's so important that the curriculum disrupts that idea of they don't look a certain way, but that now, because I've seen pictures of tribal members, I've seen all of these things, I know they can look all various different ways, and there are tribal kids probably in my classrooms, in my buildings, and I just don't know it, and I need to ask the questions.
So when our Native students see their histories, their culture reflected accurately in our classrooms, what shifts do you notice in engagement or their identity or confidence?
Yeah, I see a couple of things. When my students specifically, like when my Native education students go through some of the JML-STI lessons, I think first and foremost, I always see an increase in engagement. kids are always excited to talk about themselves. It's a thing for all kids, right? The minute that you say something that has a piece of me in it, of course, I want to share out about me and my family and my grandma and my tribe. So yes, they engage quite a bit more. Historically, in the U.S. education system, Native kids, once again, because of all of that history, they're often not engaged. They're often much quieter. They're often avoiding eye contact. They're often, right, like not wanting to speak up in class. And so it's so fun to see JML-STI lessons happen, and then kids immediately light up because they want to share. They want to share about them. And we encourage when educators do these lessons, we encourage, of course, let your Native kids speak up if they would like to, but also it's to encourage all of your kids to speak up and share about their culture, maybe their familial setting, maybe they're also living with grandparents in a multi-generational household. So it's just like really exciting things where kids increase engagement for sure. I would also say I think it raises questions that might not live in the lesson specifically. So there will be lessons and our Native students will engage, and we love that. But also peers who may be non-Native have more questions. If you don't know, Native history is kind of rough and ready. Like it was not a great time between tribal peoples and the federal government. And so we don't explicitly say that in some of our lessons. That would be a little bit too much, but kids catch it. They're very smart. They have questions. They're like, what do you mean you made them all move, 2,000 miles to where they've never been before? I don't understand. Why can't they fish in a river they have always fished for thousands and thousands of years? And so I think another great part about the JML-STI lessons is that it's inquiry-based. And so kids immediately want to have more of these questions and these deeper conversations. And I love that for my kids, but I also love that for their peers, that they do have these questions and they want some answers. They're bugged for on behalf of Native peoples, and I always love that.
What is one small but powerful step that our educators could take to honor Indigenous perspectives in their classrooms?
I would say small, but probably the most powerful step. And once again, this kind of harkens back to I'm scared to start. How do I start? Is that the learning has to start with you. I think the district does a really good job of sending out a bunch of materials. The state has done a very good job of collecting a bunch of materials and resources. And that is scary. Like it's a lot. It's information overload. And I know that. I've been a part of both systems and I get it, but we have to start somewhere. So I think the most powerful thing is just to start with one video, one article, one thing that I have had a question about, and I just want to find this one answer because they are so interconnected. It will always lead to more learning. But if you don't start to do the learning, I cannot force you to learn it, right? And so oftentimes I have seen the most powerful implementation of JML-STI happen at schools and in buildings where one teacher decided, I'm going to fight this fight. And they have fought that fight and they have made their teams fight that fight with them. And then it goes, to maybe another grade band. And then the principal's getting looped in. And then I have an entire pilot school where I didn't even step foot in there. I just had one teacher who said, this is so important and I don't know why we're not doing it. So I know that got a little woo-woo, but it's true. I see it every single time, every district I have gone to before. It always starts with one teacher, and many times they're not Native teachers. They just have a strong sense of, I need to be doing this, whether or not I have these students in my rooms. This is something that I can be doing. And they just start with the learning. They start with one little thing, and it just grows from there.
That's beautiful. Nice. How do partnerships with local tribes strengthen the learning experience for kids?
Yeah, I think we have a really great setup here at Puyallup School District because we are able to partner with the Puyallup Tribe of Indians. They're very generous. Their tagline, if you will, is the generous and welcoming people, and they truly do embody that. They are very giving of resources, of time, of effort, of energy. They're always willing to partner. So it really helps us on the district level, like when we are creating new materials, when we want to vet our materials or resources, or even when we ask for professional development or things like that. We are so lucky in that the tribe is willing to come and help us out. They do have 12 or 13 other partner districts, so they help us out, which is great. I would say too, a large chunk of our Native American students do come from the Puyallup tribe. Some of our district sits on tribal lands, current tribal lands today, not just usual and accustomed territories. So we are so grateful that we have a tribe who's willing to help out and who has the means and resources to help us out in this work. They host a lot of materials just online. They've created a lot of community facing resources that we here at the district use all the time. When you think about the language, the tribal language that we have up in our schools, when you think about the videos of books, of just physical things that have been printed and made for all of these districts, it is not something you see everywhere. If you've never worked in another place, inside or outside of Washington, some tribes do not share language, and that's their right. It's right. It's their language. They're allowed not to share it. And we love that for them, but we are so grateful to be in a place where we have so much readily available access to tribal language and culture materials from our partner tribe. So it really does increase, the experience that we get to have. And I will say for my Native education students, we get to go to the tribe. I take all of my kids over to Chief Leshai and they get to engage in song and dance during one of their circle days. And it's just such a great experience for them. And I always tell people, I can take junior high kids for an hour over to the tribal school and it will do more for their, once again, identity, belonging, personal questions and how they connect with their own culture than it would if I spent those monthly meetings for 5 years, right? If I went and saw these kids for 5 years for 30 minutes at a time, just taking them over there and having them experience that and seeing kids who look just like them, speaking the language, singing the songs, dancing, all of these things. So we're just really, really lucky. And I don't know if enough folks know it. We are so lucky to have such a strong partnership and be so physically close to our partner tribe.
Right. So, if you could leave our teachers and leaders with one message about why this work matters, not just for our Native students, but for all of our students, what would that message be?
I think the work is so important because it is true. We are at a time in history where we can very easily ignore our past and our history. We could say, the boarding schools that all of our Native children had to go through, it was in the past and it no longer affects them. Or we could say, it is cool that these students used to speak tribal language a long time ago, but English is now the language we're going to speak. We could say those things. I think we're at a time where we can also hold the line and we can say, even though I don't speak a tribal language, I think it's so important that it is available to my students. I think it's so important that every student, whether they're Native, non-Native, wherever they're coming from, if they step foot in the Puyallup School District, which is on Puyallup tribal land, that they have visual representation of the Puyallup tribe. That's one small thing that we can do that reminds us as people, that reminds our students and our families and our community that there is a history on this land. When people bring up land acknowledgements, they're like, why do we do land acknowledgements? And my answer is always like, you're literally just acknowledging the truth of the place. You're just saying, hey, did you know that this was a thing since time immemorial, that it has always been the place of these peoples? And it doesn't have to be anything huge or big, but all we're doing is ensuring that the history of this land and that the history of these people continue to be something that we talk about and we know about.
I think I've got one of the signs in my window here, and we've got them throughout the district. But I love seeing them in my neighborhood. I love the message that sends to me about the advocacy of whoever lives in that house, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like, especially again for those family members who are Native, who maybe didn't have a positive experience at school, I hope that even just seeing something as simple as the language, the signs present, that it sends that message that school is a place for everyone.
Yes.
I'm glad you're here.
Yes. And I think I know for a fact it is a silent signal to our kids.
Good.
If they're Puyallup or not, I know that they see the signs and they flag it and they catch it and they see it. And I'm talking about young ones, but also we had high school students from Spokane come over. We hosted Future Native Teacher Initiative out at Carson. Shout out to Dr. Chandler for hosting all of us, but we had students from Spokane and they clocked the language immediately. That is not their language, right? They clocked it, they saw it all over the place. They saw it in classrooms. They brought it up multiple times. As I see myself here, even though it's not me, I see representation of me here. I know it's a safe place. I know I belong here. I know I can talk here. So it was really cute in seeing that. And I think it's, the same thing when we're out and about in neighborhoods and you see, right? It's like, oh, I know this is a safe place for me.
Yes.
And it's if you're Native, but also, North America is all Indigenous. And so I think it really does mean something to think like this is a safe place for me to step into.
Right. Well, Kayla, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for being a guest on TandL Talks. And thank you for your time.
Thanks.
Kayla, thank you for being with us today and for the way you kept grounding this work in both history and humanity. What I'm taking from this conversation is simple and significant. Native education isn't an add-on, it's a commitment to truth, a commitment to repairing harm, a commitment to making our schools feel like places where students and families can walk through the doors and breathe and learn. I also love the reminder that small steps can carry big power. Learning one thing and letting it lead to the next, choosing language that honors families, teaching with a contemporary lens, and making sure our curriculum doesn't treat Native peoples like a chapter that ends. And those visible signals like tribal language in our buildings and neighborhoods matter more than many of us realize. They quietly tell students and families, I see you, you're safe here, you're welcome here. To our listeners, if you're someone who wants to do this well but feels nervous about getting it wrong, let this be your encouragement. Start with the learning. Stay in it even when it's uncomfortable. Ask questions, partner, keep going. We are so grateful for Kayla's expertise here in the Puyallup School District, and we're grateful for the partnership and the work ahead. Thanks for joining us today for TandL Talks, and we'll see you next time.